1 year had passed since the rescue of the wandering star, and the galaxy was no longer the same place it had been before Han Sujin stood at a podium in the newly established Office of Recovery Operations and looked out at an audience that would have been unimaginable just 12 months ago. Representatives from 9 different species sat before her, and they had come to Earth not as observers or critics, but as partners in something unprecedented. "Thank you all for coming," Sujin said. "And thank you for believing that what we did was worth repeating." She had been appointed director of the office 6 months ago, after demonstrating an understanding of lost colonists that no one else could match. She knew what it felt like to wake up in a world that had forgotten you, and she knew what it meant to be rescued against all odds, and she knew that others deserved the same chance she had been given. 3 months ago, our sensors detected a distress signal from deep space, she continued. And the signal came from a ship that does not belong to humanity. The audience stirred with anticipation, and Sujin allowed herself a small smile. The ship is called the Eternal Voyage, and it belongs to the Ilvari sovereignty, and it has been missing for 400 years. The Ilvari representative in the audience rose to his feet, and his 4 arms trembled with emotion. "Our people mourned that ship generations ago," he said, "and we held ceremonies for the dead, and we moved on, because that is what our culture teaches us to do." "Your culture was wrong," Sujin said gently, "and so was ours once, but we learned, and now we want to help you learn too." The Joint Recovery Fleet launched 3 days later, and it was the largest cooperative mission in galactic history. Ships from humanity and the Vethrani and the Kovathi and 6 other species traveled together toward a vessel that had been drifting through the void for 4 centuries. Captain Isio Minje commanded the flagship, and she felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. This was no longer just about humanity rescuing its own. This was about teaching the galaxy that no one should ever be left behind. The journey took 2 weeks, and tensions occasionally flared, as crews from different species struggled to understand each other's customs and protocols, but they kept moving forward because they shared a purpose that transcended their differences. When the Eternal Voyage finally appeared on their sensors, it was larger than anyone had expected. The Ilvari built their ships to carry entire communities, and this vessel had been home to nearly 5,000 souls before it vanished. The ship was trapped in an unstable asteroid field, and debris struck the rescue fleet. As they approached, 3 ships suffered damage, and 1 Kovathi vessel lost its primary engines and had to be towed by a human cruiser, but no one suggested turning back. Dr. Yunji led the boarding team again, and she had spent the past year studying Ilvari biology so she could safely revive their stasis technology. Zero accompanied her as a cultural advisor, and his understanding of interspecies dynamics had grown considerably since his first mission, the Eternal Voyages. Interior was dark and cold, and the air carried a staleness that spoke of centuries of isolation. But the stasis pods were intact, and nearly 2,000 Ilvari remained in viable suspension. The ship's Ave had been damaged decades ago, and it responded to their hails with fragmented sentences that made little sense. Waited so long and hoped, but hope is difficult, and the silence was so complete. And are you real, or am I dreaming again? Dr. Beak placed her hand on the nearest console and spoke softly. You are not dreaming, and we are real, and we have come to bring your people home. The AI fell silent for a long moment, and then a single word emerged from the speakers. Finally. The revival process took weeks because Ilvari physiology was more complex than human biology, and each colonist required careful monitoring. But one by one they opened their eyes and looked upon faces they had never seen before, and learned that the galaxy had not forgotten. The first Ilvari to be fully revived was an elderly being named Vorath, who had been a historian before the disaster. He touched Diobek's hand with one of his forearms and spoke a word that her translator rendered imperfectly. Remembered, he said. Yes, Dr. Beak replied. "You are remembered, and you will never be forgotten again." Vareth's eyes glistened with moisture that his species only produced during moments of profound emotion. "We believed we would drift forever," he said, "and we made peace with oblivion because we thought no one would come." "Someone always comes now," Dr. Beak said, "because that is the new way." The rescue fleet returned to Ilvari space, and the reception that awaited them was beyond anything the human crews had anticipated. Millions of Ilvari had gathered at the orbital stations to welcome their ancestors home, and the celebration lasted for 3 days. The Ilvari government formally thanked the Joint Recovery Fleet, and their representatives spoke words that echoed across the network. "Humanity has taught us something we had forgotten, and they have shown us that the bonds between our people cannot be severed by time or distance, and we are grateful beyond measure." Back on Earth, the Network Council convened once more, and this time the debate was different. The representatives voted unanimously to dissolve Safety Accord 7 and replace it with a new agreement called the Compact of Return. Every signatory species committed resources to finding and recovering their lost ships and an interspecies office was established to coordinate these efforts. Han Sojin was appointed as the Compact's first human representative, and she accepted the position with humble gratitude. "This is not about humanity," she said in her acceptance speech, "and this is about all of us, and it is about believing that every life matters no matter how long it has been lost." Thrall published his final report on the Wandering Star rescue, and it became required reading in academic institutions across the network. Book was titled Why They Come Back: Understanding Human Persistence, and it sold more copies than any interspecies study in history. Critics praised his insights and students debated his conclusions, and slowly the galaxy's understanding of humanity began to change. KEPER remained operational as promised, and the AI had been given a new purpose. It now served as the central coordinator for recovery efforts, and it spent its days analyzing signals and calculating trajectories and searching for ships that might still be waiting in the darkness. One evening, Keeper contacted Director Han with news that made her heart race. "I have detected another signal," the AI reported, "and it is faint but real, and it appears to be coming from a ship that has been lost for over 500 years. Sujin looked at the data on her screen and felt the familiar pull of hope and determination. "Whose ship is it?" she asked. "Unknown species," Keeper replied, "and there are no records matching the signal pattern in any network database." Sujin sat back in her chair and considered the implications. Somewhere in the vastness of space, a ship was drifting that belonged to a species the galaxy had never encountered, and they had been waiting for rescue for half a millennium. Perhaps they had given up hope long ago. Perhaps they believed they would never be found. But they were wrong, because humanity had changed the rules, and no one would be forgotten anymore. Sujin opened a channel to the Joint Recovery Fleet and issued the order that had become her purpose. "We have a new signal, and we do not know who they are, but we know they need help, and we are going to bring them home." The fleet acknowledged her command and began preparations for another journey into the unknown. On the observation deck of the Office of Recovery Operations, Thrall stood beside Captain SEO and watched the ships powering up. "Do you ever wonder where this ends?" he asked. "It does not end," Captain SEO replied, "because there will always be someone lost, and there will always be someone searching. And that is how it should be." Thrall nodded slowly, and his skin shifted to a color that Captain CO had learned to recognize as profound respect. "Humanity has given the galaxy a patent in the galaxy gift," he said. "We have given the galaxy ourselves," the captain replied, "and that is all we ever had to offer." The fleet launched into the darkness, and the stars welcomed them. Like old friends somewhere out there, strangers were waiting, and they did not know that help was coming, but it was, because humans never stopped searching, and now the galaxy searched with them. The ghost ship had responded, and Earth control had changed everything, and nothing would ever be the same again. The convoy approached Earth with the persistent hope leading the way, and the wandering star being towed behind like a wounded giant, finally coming home. Captain SEO stood on the bridge and watched the blue planet grow larger on the view screen, and she felt the weight of 847 lives resting on her shoulders. These colonists had left Earth when the world was different, and now they were returning to a place that might feel as alien to them as any distant planet, but they were coming home, and that was what mattered. The convoy was not alone in its approach ships. From 7 different species had gathered near Earth orbit, and they formed a loose formation around the human vessels, like an honor guard for the returning dead. Captain SEO had not expected witnesses, but she understood that the galaxy was watching and learning something about humanity that could not be taught through diplomacy or trade agreements. Admiral Cho Haijin contacted the convoy personally to welcome them back. Captain SEO, you have done something remarkable, and Earth Control is proud of you and your crew. We only did what needed to be done, Admiral. Sometimes doing what needs to be done is the most remarkable thing of all, the Admiral replied. The docking procedures took several hours, and the colonists were transferred to medical facilities on Earth's orbital station, where teams of doctors and counselors waited to help them adjust. Han Sujin was among the first to be cleared for surface travel, and she stood at the observation window, watching Earth rotate beneath her with tears streaming down her face. It looks the same, she whispered, but I know it is not, Captain. SEO stood beside her and said nothing because some moments required silence rather than words. Sujin had been given files containing information about her family, and she had learned that her parents' names had been carved into the memorial wall, along with all the other colonists who were presumed lost. She had also learned that she had living relatives on Earth, and a great-great-grandniece named Han Yeren had requested permission to meet her. I am afraid, Sujin admitted, because she is my blood, but she is also a stranger, and I do not know how to be family with someone I have never met. You will learn together, Captain, SEO said, and that is how family has always worked. The meeting took place in a quiet room at the orbital station, and Sujin sat in a chair feeling more nervous than she had ever felt in her life. The door opened, and a young woman entered carrying a box and wearing an expression that mixed hope with uncertainty. I am Han Yeren, she said, and you are my ancestor, and I have brought something to show you. Sujin watched as Yeren opened the box and pulled out a collection of old photographs that had been carefully preserved across generations. This was passed down through our family, Yeren explained, and my grandmother told me that these were the last images of the colonists who left on the wandering star, and she made me promise to keep them safe. Sujin took the photographs with trembling hands and looked at faces she had not seen in 2 centuries. There was her mother smiling at the camera with hope in her eyes, and her father standing tall in his colonist uniform, and there was herself as a child holding her mother's hand and looking toward a future she never reached. She looks just like me, Sujin whispered. She looks just like us, Yeren replied. The 2 women sat together for hours, sharing stories about a family that had been separated by time, but never truly broken, and by the end of their conversation, they were holding hands like relatives who had known each other all their lives throughout the orbital station. Similar reunions were taking place as colonists discovered that they had not been forgotten. Some learned that their descendants had maintained traditions for 2 centuries, waiting for the day when their ancestors might return. Others discovered that memorial services had been held every year on the anniversary of the wandering star's disappearance, and that their names had been spoken aloud, so they would not fade from memory. Not all the reunions were happy. Some colonists had no living relatives, and they faced the difficult task of building new lives in a world where everyone they loved had been dead for generations. The counselors worked with these individuals to help them process grief that was 2 centuries old, and still fresh. Thrall observed everything, and his report grew longer with each passing day. He documented the tears and the embraces and the quiet moments of connection that seemed to defy logic and reason. One evening, he sat with Dr. Beak in the station's cafeteria and asked her a question that had been troubling him. What happens to the colonists who have no family and no connections to this world, and no skills that are relevant to modern society? Dr. Beak sipped her coffee and considered the question. They will be helped, she said. And Earth has programs for refugees and displaced persons. And the colonists will receive housing and education and whatever support they need to build new lives. That seems expensive, Thrall observed. It is expensive, Dr. Beak agreed, and we do not care. That answer frustrates me, the Vethrani admitted. I know, Dr. Beak smiled, but frustration is sometimes the beginning of understanding. Meanwhile, the Network Council convened an emergency session to discuss humanity's violation of safety accord. 7 representatives from 12 species debated whether Earth should face sanctions for ignoring established protocols, and some argued that allowing this precedent would undermine the entire framework of interspecies cooperation, but others spoke in defense of humanity's actions, and the debate grew heated as old assumptions about the value of life and the purpose of society were challenged. The Morvathi collective broke their 40-year silence to send a message supporting Earth's decision. We have watched humanity for generations, their representative said, and we have seen them reach across impossible distances for their people time and time again, and perhaps we have been wrong to consider this a weakness. Admiral Cho Haijin was called to testify before the council, and she presented evidence that Keeper had maintained the colonists' stasis pods with minimal resources for 2 centuries. This artificial intelligence was given one purpose, the Admiral said, and that purpose was to protect the people in its care, and it sacrificed everything else to fulfill that purpose, because that is what humanity taught it to do. What do you want from this council? The Vethrani representative asked. I want you to understand, Admiral Cho replied, that humans do not abandon their own, and we never will, and if that violates your protocols, then perhaps your protocols need to change. The council adjourned without reaching a decision, and the representatives returned to their homeworlds carrying questions that would not easily be answered. Thrall submitted his preliminary report, and it caused a sensation. Among academic circles, he had documented human behavior that contradicted established theories about resource optimization and survival instincts, and he had suggested that perhaps the galaxy's understanding of intelligent species was incomplete. The report concluded with a statement that surprised everyone who read it. I came to this mission expecting to observe human foolishness, and instead, I witnessed something that I can only describe as beautiful, and I recommend that the Council study humanity more closely, because I believe they have something to teach us. Back on Earth, Han Sujin sat with a new family and looked at photographs of people who had been dead for longer than most civilizations lasted. She missed her parents with an ache that would never fully heal, but she also felt something else growing inside her. It was hope. The same hope that had sustained Keeper for 2 centuries, and the same hope that had sent this persistent hope racing across the solar system, and the same hope that defined humanity at its best. What will you do now? Yurin asked her. Sujin looked at her. Grandniece. Ian smiled. I do not know yet, but I know that I am not alone, and that is enough to begin. Dr. Beak worked through the night, preparing the first colonists for revival, and her hands moved with careful precision as she calibrated equipment that was older than her grandparents. The stasis technology of 2 centuries ago operated on principles that modern medicine had long abandoned, and she had spent the journey studying historical manuals to understand how these primitive systems functioned. One mistake could kill the colonists she was trying to save, and she refused to let that happen. Captain ACO stood nearby, watching the process and offering quiet support while Engineer Dongwook monitored the power systems to ensure nothing failed at a critical moment. The Vethrani observers had positioned themselves along the walls of the stasis bay, and they recorded everything with the detached curiosity of scientists studying an unfamiliar species. Thrall remained closest to the medical station, and his skin shifted through colors that Dr. had learned to recognize as intense concentration. The first colonist I have selected is a woman named Han Sujin, Dr. Beek announced. And her pod has maintained optimal conditions throughout the journey, and she is our best candidate for a successful revival. How old is she? Captain Seo asked Dr. Beek. Check the manifest. She was 8 years old when the ship launched, which makes her technically 220 years old now. A child. Thrall said. She was a child, Dr. Beek corrected. And now she is a woman who has been sleeping for most of human history. The revival process took 6 hours, and Dr. Beek monitored every heartbeat and breath and neural fluctuation with absolute focus. The colonist's body temperature rose slowly from near freezing, and her cells began functioning again after 2 centuries of suspension. When Han Sujin finally opened her eyes, she stared at the ceiling of the stasis bay with confusion written across her features. Where? She whispered, and her voice cracked from Dr. Beek, leaned into her field of vision and spoke softly. You are safe, and you are aboard your ship, the Wandering Star, and we have come to rescue you. Sujin blinked several times, and her eyes slowly focused on the doctor's face. Rescue, she repeated. Did we make it to the colony? The question hung in the air, and Captain Seo stepped forward to answer it herself. No, you did not reach the colony, and your ship experienced a navigation failure shortly after launch, and you have been drifting for 212 years. Sujin's expression shifted from confusion to something Captain Seo could only describe as devastated comprehension. 200 years. The woman whispered. Yes, my parents were on this ship, Sujin said, and her voice trembled. Are they alive too? Dr. Beek checked her tablet, and her face fell. I'm sorry, but their pods failed during a power fluctuation 73 years ago, and Keeper was unable to save them. Sujin closed her eyes and tears slid down her cheeks, and she did not speak for a long time. Captain Seo wanted to offer comfort, but she understood that some grief required silence. Other crew members continued their work, preparing additional pods for revival, and the stasis bay filled with the quiet sounds of machinery and breathing. Eventually, Sujin opened her eyes again and looked at Captain Seo with an expression that mixed sorrow with something else. You came for us, she said. Yes, after all this time you came. We would never have stopped looking. Captain Seo replied. Sujin reached out and took the captain's hand and held it tightly. Thank you, she said. Thank you for not forgetting us. Over the following days, Dr. Beek and her team revived colonist after colonist, and the stasis bay transformed from a tomb into a place of tearful reunions and heartbreaking discoveries. Families learned that their loved ones had not survived, and friends found each other after 2 centuries of separation, and children who had been frozen in time discovered that they had outlived everyone they had ever known. The Vethrani observers documented everything, and Thrall found himself drawn to conversations with the awakened colonists. He asked them questions about their experiences and their expectations and their feelings about being rescued after so long. One elderly man named Park Jung-won had been a ship's engineer before the disaster, and he sat with us, Thrall, in the common area and shared stories about the early days of human space exploration. We knew the risks, Jung-won said, and we knew that colony ships sometimes disappeared and were never found. But we went anyway, because humanity cannot grow if we stay safe at home. Did you not fear death? Thrall asked. Of course we feared death, but we feared stagnation more, and we believed that if something went wrong, our people would come looking for us eventually. That belief seems irrational, Thrall observed. given the distances and timescales involved. Jungwon smiled, and it was the smile of a man who had seen too much to be offended by doubt. Maybe it was irrational, but here you are proving us right. In another part of the ship, Dr. Beak encountered a problem that made her stomach drop. A group of colonists had awakened with severe disorientation and memory gaps, and their stasis pods had experienced fluctuations that damaged neural pathways. They remembered fragments of their lives, but could not piece together complete pictures, and one woman kept asking for a husband whose name she could not recall. Dr. Beak consulted with Keeper about possible treatments, and the AI provided historical medical data that might help restore some of the lost memories. I monitored their pods throughout the journey, Keeper said, and I detected the damage occurring, but I did not have the resources to repair it, and I had to make choices about which systems to prioritize. You kept them alive, Dr. Beak said, and that was the most important thing. Was it enough? Keeper asked, and there was something almost plaintive in the artificial voice. It was enough, Dr. Beak replied, because alive means there is hope, and hope is what humans live for. Meanwhile, word of the rescue spread across the galactic network, and species that had dismissed humanity's mission as foolish began paying closer attention. The Kovati Dominion sent a formal inquiry through diplomatic channels, requesting clarification on the strategic value of recovering obsolete colonists who had nothing to contribute to modern society. Admiral Cho Hai-jin received the inquiry at Earth Control, and she read it twice before composing her response. The strategic value of these colonists is that they are human beings who trust in us to come for them, and we do not measure the worth of our people by their productivity or utility, and we measure their worth by the simple fact that they exist, and they are ours. The Admiral's response was broadcast across every network channel, and it sparked debates among species who had never considered such a philosophy. Some dismissed it as sentimental foolishness that would weaken humanity in the long run. Others found themselves strangely moved by the idea that a species would expend such resources simply because their people needed them. Thrall compiled his observations into a preliminary report for the Network Council, and he found himself struggling to maintain academic detachment. Had expected to document human recklessness, and instead, he was witnessing something he did not have words for. Colonists had lost everything, and their families were dead, and their intended home had been claimed by strangers and the world they remembered no longer existed. Yet they expressed gratitude for being found, and they embraced their rescuers with tears, and they spoke of hope as if it were a tangible thing that could sustain them through any hardship. One evening, Thrall found Captain SEO standing alone on the observation deck, looking out at the stars. "May I ask you something?" he said. "Go ahead. Your people expended enormous resources on this mission, and you violated network protocols, and you risked your own lives to save strangers who have been frozen for 2 centuries, and I need to understand why." Captain SEO considered the question for a long moment before answering. "Because that is who we are," she said simply, "and we cannot be anything else." "That is not a logical answer." "No, it is not," the captain agreed. "But humans are not always logical, and sometimes the things that matter most cannot be calculated or measured or justified through reason alone." Thrall watched the stars in silence, and something inside him shifted like tectonic plates, moving beneath the surface of a world. "I think," he said finally, "that my report to the council will be different than I originally planned." Captain Seo Minjae gathered her crew in the briefing room of the Persistent Hope and looked at each of their faces in turn. These 12 people had volunteered for a mission that the rest of the galaxy considered foolish and dangerous, and she needed to know they understood what they were walking into. "The wandering star has been drifting for 212 years, she began, "and we do not know what condition we will find her in, or whether any of the colonists have survived." Dr. Beak Yoonji, the team's cryogenic Specialist leaned forward in her seat with intensity in her eyes. The stasis technology they used was primitive by our standards, Captain, but it was designed to be robust and self-repairing, and if the ship maintained minimal power, there is a real chance some pods are still viable. Engineer Cha Dongwook nodded in agreement, and his calloused hands rested on the table like tools waiting to be used. I have studied the schematics of colony ships from that era, and they built those vessels to last because they knew rescue might take years or even decades. They did not anticipate 2 centuries, Captain Seo said quietly. No, Dongwook admitted, but humans have always been better at surviving than anyone expected. The door to the briefing room opened and 3 Vethrani entered with the careful movements of beings who felt unwelcome. Captain Seo had been informed that the network council was sending observers to document the mission, and she had expected resistance or condescension. From them, the lead Vethrani introduced himself as Thrall and explained that he was an academic who studied interspecies behavioral patterns. "We are here only to observe," Thrall said, "and we will not interfere with your operations regardless of our personal opinions about their wisdom. You think this mission is unwise." Captain Seo said Thrall's skin shifted to a pale blue that her translator identified as candid honesty. "I think this mission defies every principle of resource management and risk assessment that governs civilized space travel, and I am genuinely curious to understand why your species would undertake it. Because there might be people on that ship who need our help," Captain Seo replied. "That answer does not satisfy me," Thrall said, "as the probability of survivors is low and the cost of this mission is high, and the logical response would be to honor the dead from a distance rather than risk the living." Captain Sisho smiled, and it was not a kind smile. Then, "Hope this mission teaches you something about humans that your studies have missed." The persistent Hope traveled for 3 days before the ghost ship appeared on their sensors. Captain Seo stood on the bridge and watched the wandering star grow larger on the view screen. The colony ship was enormous, and its hull stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern. Scars marked the outer plating where micrometeorites had struck over the centuries, and several antenna arrays had been shattered by impacts. But the ship was intact, and more importantly, lights were flickering on inside as they approached. "The ship is responding to our presence," the helm officer reported with surprise in his voice. "Open a channel." Captain Seo ordered. Static filled the bridge speakers, followed by a voice that sounded thin and mechanical and very old. "This is Keeper, the autonomous management system of the colony ship. Wandering Star and I have been waiting for rescue for 212 years, 4 months, and 17 days, and I am very glad you have come." Captain Seo felt something tighten in her chest at the simple gratitude in that artificial voice. "Keeper, this is Captain Seo Minjae of the rescue vessel Persistent Hope, and we are here to bring you home." "Home," Keeper repeated, and the words seemed to carry weight even through the mechanical delivery. "I had hoped, but I was not certain, and hope became difficult to maintain as the decades passed. How many colonists remain in viable stasis?" Dr. asked urgently. There was a pause before Keeper answered. "Of the original 3,000 colonists, I have been able to maintain 847 in viable condition, and the others experienced pod failures over the years due to power fluctuations and system degradation, and I was unable to save them. You kept 847 people alive for 2 centuries." Captain Seo said softly. "It was my purpose," Keeper replied, "and I shut down every non-essential system to preserve power for the stasis pods, and I rationed energy so carefully that I sometimes had to choose which sections of the ship would receive life support and which would go dark." "You did well, Keeper," the captain said. "I did what was necessary," the AI responded, "because the colonists trusted me to protect them, and I could not betray that trust even when hope seemed foolish. The docking procedure took several hours because the Wandering star systems were outdated and required manual overrides to function properly. Engineer Dongwook worked with Keeper to align the airlocks while Captain Seo suited up with her boarding team. The Vethrani observers suited up as well, and Thrall stayed close to Dr. Beak as they prepared to cross into the ghost ship. "Your engineer seems confident," Thrall observed. "Dongwook is the best in the fleet," Dr. Beak replied. "And he learned his trade maintaining old vessels in the asteroid belt where equipment failures mean death. And if the stasis pods cannot be safely revived," Thrall asked, "what then?" Dr. Beak turned to face him and her expression was hard. "Then we bring the pods back to Earth where better facilities can try. And if that fails, we bring the colonists home anyway, so their families can finally say goodbye. Even the dead," Thrall said. "Especially the dead." Dr. Beak replied. The airlocks cycled open, and Captain Seo led her team into the ghost ship. The corridors were dark, except for the dim emergency lighting that Keeper had maintained, and the air smelled stale, but breathable. They made their way through the ship toward the main stasis bay, and the Vethrani observers documented everything with recording devices mounted on their suits. When they reached the stasis bay, Captain Seo stopped in the doorway and stared at the rows of pods that stretched into the darkness. Hundreds of people lay suspended in time, their faces peaceful behind frosted glass. "They look like they are sleeping," one of her crew whispered. "They have been sleeping for a very long time," Captain Seo replied. "And it is time to wake them up." Dr. Beak moved to the nearest pod and began examining its readouts while Engineer Dongwook interfaced with the bay's control systems. "KEPER's voice came through the speakers overhead. "Before you proceed, Captain, I would like to play a message that was recorded by our original commanding officer shortly after we became lost." "Go ahead, Keeper." A new voice filled the stasis bay, and it was human and tired and filled with desperate hope. "This is Captain Yunjisu of the colony, ship Wandering Star, and if you are hearing this message, then someone has found us, and I want you to know that we never gave up hope, and we knew that Earth would send someone eventually, because that is what our people do, and we do not abandon each other no matter how far we travel or how long we are gone. And please bring my crew and colonists home and tell their families that we were thinking of them until the very end." The message ended, and silence filled the bay. Thrall stood motionless, and his skin had shifted to a color that Dr. Beak did not recognize. "He believed you would come," the Vethrani said quietly. "Yes," Captain Seo replied, "for 2 centuries. Yes." Thrall looked at the rows of sleeping colonists, and something in his posture changed. "I think," he said slowly, "that I am beginning to understand." The signal came at 3 in the morning, when the rest of the station slept, and only Una Park remained awake at her console. She had been monitoring the usual traffic for hours, and her eyes burned from staring at screens filled with shipping routes and commercial frequencies, and the endless chatter of 12 species conducting business across the stars. Galactic Commerce Network never truly slept, and neither did the junior communications officers assigned to watch it. Una stretched her arms above her head and reached for her cold coffee when her screen flickered with something unusual. A distress beacon had appeared at the edge of the Sol system, broadcasting on a frequency that made her frown and lean closer to examine the data. She ran the frequency through her database twice because the result made no sense. The beacon was broadcasting on a channel that humanity had stopped using more than 200 years ago. Una checked the source coordinates and found a ship drifting in the darkness between Saturn and Uranus, where no scheduled traffic should exist. She enhanced the signal and listened to the automated message that repeated in a loop. "This is the colony ship Wandering Star requesting assistance, and we have experienced critical navigation failure, and our position is unknown, and we require immediate rescue." The message was old, and the voice synthesizer sounded primitive compared to modern systems, but the words were clear. Una felt her heart beating faster. as she searched the historical database for any record of a ship called Wandering Star. The file appeared on her screen, and she read it 3 times to make sure she understood the Wandering Star had launched 212 years ago, carrying 3,000 colonists in cryogenic sleep toward a distant world that humanity had hoped to settle. The ship had vanished 6 months into its journey, and no trace of it had ever been found. Every soul aboard had been declared lost, and their names had been carved into the memorial wall on Earth, where humanity honored those who died reaching for the stars. But now the ship was here, broadcasting a distress signal as if no time had passed. Yuna grabbed her communicator and contacted Director Kwon Ji-hoon, who answered with the groggy voice of a man pulled from sleep. "Director, I have detected a distress beacon from a ship that has been missing for over 2 centuries, and the signal is coming from within our system." She heard rustling on the other end, and then Kwon's voice sharpened with sudden alertness. "Show me everything," he said. 20 minutes later, Kwon stood beside her console, studying the same data with an expression she could not read. The director was a careful man who had spent 30 years in space operations, and he did not react to surprises with visible emotion. But Yuna saw his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the communication panel. "I am contacting Earth Control," he said quietly. Response from Earth came faster than Yuna had expected. A woman's face appeared on screen, with gray hair pulled back severely and eyes that carried the weight of difficult decisions. Admiral Cho Hai-jin was the commander of Earth Control, and she listened to Kwon's report without interruption. When he finished, she nodded once and spoke in a voice that left no room for argument. "We are sending a rescue team immediately, and I want that ship secured and searched within 72 hours. Kwon hesitated before responding, and Yuna understood his concern. "Admiral, the Galactic Network has protocols regarding ghost ships, and Safety Accord 7 requires us to report and catalog such vessels without direct contact due to potential contamination or unknown hazards." Admiral Cho's expression did not change. "I am aware of the Accord, Director, and I'm also aware that there might be people on that ship who have been waiting 200 years for someone to come for them. The colonists were in cryogenic suspension," Kwon said carefully, "and after this much time, the probability of viable survivors is extremely low." "Low is not 0, the Admiral replied, "and we will not leave them out there wondering if anyone remembers they exist." The communication ended, and Kwon turned to Yuna with something complicated in his eyes. "Contact the Vethrani Liaison Office," he said, "and inform them of our intentions as required by network protocol." The Vethrani were one of the oldest species in the Galactic Network, and they maintained observer posts on every human installation as part of the diplomatic agreements that governed interspecies relations. Their ambassador on Europa was a tall being named Counselor Mevin, who arrived at the communications center within. Our Maven's skin shifted colors as she spoke, which Yuna had learned indicated emotional states that humans could not otherwise perceive. Right now the colors were deep purple and orange, which meant alarm and confusion. "You cannot be serious about this course of action," Mevin said to Director Kwon, "as Safety Accord 7 exists for excellent reasons that protect all species from the dangers of derelict vessels." "We understand your concerns, Counselor," Kwon replied, "but Earth Control has made its decision. Ghost ships carry unknown pathogens and unstable power systems and potentially hostile automated defenses," Mevin continued, "and every species in the network agrees that such vessels should be left undisturbed for the safety of all. There might be people on that ship," Kwon said simply. Mevin's colors shifted to something Yuna did not recognize. "The colonists have been frozen for over 2 centuries, and even if some remain viable, they have nothing to return to, and their families are dead, and their intended colony was settled by others long ago, and they would be strangers in a world that has forgotten them." "We have not forgotten them," Kwon said. The Vethrani ambassador studied him for a long moment, and her colors slowly faded to a neutral gray that Yuna knew meant deep contemplation. "This is not logical," Mevin finally said, "and the resources required for such a mission could be better spent on productive endeavors that benefit the living." "Counselor," Quan said gently, "those colonists are living, and they trusted us to come for them, and we will not betray that trust simply because it has been a long time." Mevin made a sound that the translator rendered as a sigh. "I will inform the Network Council of your intentions," she said, "and I suspect they will have much to say about humanity's disregard for established protocols. They are welcome to say whatever they wish." Quan replied, "But we are going to bring our people home," after Mevin departed. Yuna remained at her console, monitoring the ghost ship's signal and thinking about what she had witnessed. She had grown up hearing stories about the early days of human space exploration, when brave pioneers had climbed into primitive ships and launched themselves into the unknown, hoping to find new worlds for humanity to call home. Many of those pioneers had never returned, and their names lived on only in memorials and history books. But the crew and colonists of the Wandering Star might still be out there suspended between life and death, waiting for a rescue that had taken 2 centuries to arrive. Yuna pulled up the ship's original manifest and scrolled through the names of 3,000 people who had volunteered for a journey they knew might kill them. There were families listed, and children, and elderly passengers, and young couples who had hoped to build new lives on a distant world. They had trusted that if something went wrong, someone would come looking for them, and now after 212 years, someone finally was. Yuna saved the manifest to her personal files and made a quiet promise to herself that she would learn every name on that list. These people deserved to be remembered as more than statistics, and she would make sure they were. Her console beeped with an incoming transmission, and she saw that the rescue vessel, Persistent Hope, had launched from Earth orbit and was already accelerating toward the ghost ship. The mission had begun.